Hometown Ghost Stories contains serious and often distressing events and is not intended for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Guys, we have a very, very interesting story. And I know we use the word interesting a lot, but this story is quite interesting. It's quite unique. You guys are going to want to hear this. We have our friend Evan coming on to talk about his experience with dying. And not just once, not just twice. I won't spoil how many times he died, but we're going to talk about what happened to him and what he saw during that experience, and about some other people that have had this experience as well, and what they saw during the afterlife. But without further ado, let's bring in our special guest, Evan.
How you doing?
Thanks for joining us, man. And I think the way to do this is just tell everybody what happened to you, because the story is wild.
Sure. And by the way, thanks for having me, guys. Love your channel.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was in 2016, specifically March 28th, 2016. I'm a writer in Los Angeles, and I was coming back from a studio pitch. It was about 10:30 in the morning. Came back to my apartment. I was taking my dog Atticus out for a walk. Grabbed the leash, and literally, when I grabbed the leash, my left arm lit up. Like it felt like the sun was in my vein. It just like felt like the 4th of July was in my left arm, just burning. My chest got tight. I started sweating profusely, and just without even thinking, I just called 911. I was like, I don't know if this is a panic attack or what's going on. It feels like it might be a heart attack. I've never called 911 in my life. And literally what happened that day was that I ended up dying 8 times, 6 times on the way to the hospital and 2 times in the ER before surgery. And then to add insult to injury, I was then in a week-long coma where on the 5th night, they basically pulled the plug, and I woke up miraculously. A few hours later, all my organs that failed just went back to normal and within a day. And within 3 days after that, I was released from the hospital, and it's the biggest recovery on record at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills.
That's wild.
Yeah. I literally called 911, and they said, we're going to send an ambulance over. Luckily, the ambulance was just around the corner from my place, coming back from another call. The firemen came to my apartment door. I remember them knocking on the door. I opened the door for them. I remember them saying, "Hey, are you the one who called 911?" I said, "Yes." And then it was like blackout. They said that I fell right in their arms, just died right in their arms, right in the doorway. They dragged me down to the lobby where they had a stretcher. They wheeled me out. They got me in the ambulance, and they revived me in the ambulance. And then they said it was like a ping pong match. I was like dead for 30 to 40 seconds. They revived me with at first defibrillators, and then they started, using just hand-to-hand compressions. They like broke a couple ribs, and they said I woke up, came back to life, then died. 30, 40 seconds, back and forth 6 times on the way to the hospital. And then in the ER, I was told that I was pronounced dead for 2 minutes each for that 7th and 8th time before they finally stabilized me enough to put 2 stents in my heart. It turns out that I had a massive widowmaker heart attack. And that's what happened.
Let me ask you this. Do you remember any of this? Like how much of it, if any, do you recall during it?
The only thing I recall is, there's things that I recall from when I, came out of the coma a week later, and things I should not have been recalling, and I'll get to that. But right. The things that I recalled was, other than answering the door for the firemen and saying yes to, I'm the one who called 911, and that's it. After that, the next thing that I consciously knew in reality was me waking up in the ICU and having a doctor and 2 nurses hold me down. And I remember them saying, "Where's he getting this energy from?" They could not. I was so discombobulated. I had like 30 IVs in my neck. I didn't know where I was. I felt like I was in a nightmare. I thought I was being kidnapped or something. So I kept trying to escape the ICU hospital bed. They didn't know how I had all this energy after a week of being in a coma and what I went through. where they literally had to restrain my wrists and my ankles for the first few hours until I finally calmed down and got my faculties back.
Wow.
I can't tell if these people on the ambulance were either really good at their job or really bad at their job.
They were really good because
Okay, good.
after I got out of the hospital, after I got my strength back after a few weeks, I went down to the firehouse and to thank them all. I took them all out for breakfast, and which is crazy because they told, and that's not crazy. What is crazy is that they told me that no one's ever come to thank them for their services,
Really?
which I could not believe.
But wasn't you responsible to remove all the active firefighters from the firehouse at the same time?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like some had to be on.
I'm kidding. Yeah, no, that's fine. They need breakfast.
No.
But
Listen,
think back to that
breakfast.
ambulance ride. And it's like, obviously you're alive now, so they did their job. But when they get back, to the hospital or whatever, and they're all talking about how they did the day, like, oh, how'd you do? Oh, I saved 6 lives.
Yeah.
All the same guy.
Within 5 minutes.
I will say that the actual paramedic who was on call that day was not a regular at that station in West Hollywood. He was in a neighboring city called Los Feliz out here, and he was covering for somebody that was sick that day. So when I took them all out for breakfast, again, just the crew that saved me, they were like, you should really go and thank Ed. He's the paramedic who revived you 6 out of those 8 times in the ambulance. And I was able to describe him to a T before I actually met him. And that's part of like the other side story that, we can get to,
Yeah.
Unfortunately for Ed, his house was on fire and there were no firefighters to respond to the scene because they were all at Denny's.
Hey, we didn't go to Denny's. I would never take them to Denny's. I would take them to a nicer place. No,
I went to Waffle House. God damn it.
That's right, damn it.
I think it's actually remarkable that you called 911. And that might sound funny, but so many people, when they're going through something like this, they're just like, it's something that's just going to pass, right? Like their thought process is, I'm just going to sit down. I'll ride this out. I'll be fine. I know this because this is how one of my grandfathers died, right? He had this heart attack. He was like, I'll be fine. Was not fine. So like the fact that you were able to get yourself to call 911 so quickly, I think is actually more impressive than you know.
Well, that's actually interesting you said that, because even the nurses and the doctors at Cedars at the hospital told me that like 7 things had to happen right for me to, be here talking to you guys today. And one of them was calling 911 on time. They said that like statistically, most males in this country will like think it's, a panic attack or indigestion, or they'll just think on it too long. And I've never called 911 in my entire life. So I don't know what drew me, to say, wow, this is serious. I've never felt this before, but let me pick up the phone. I'd like to, the fairy tale story I tell myself is that a few years prior to that, my father, who passed away from cancer, he died on my birthday. And the last thing he said was my name. And I like to think that like, he was whispering in my ear to call 911 and kind of like helping me out. But literally, I don't know why I called 911. Also, if the ambulance wasn't right around the corner coming back from another call, because even if I called 911, in time and they didn't get to me in time, they would have been scooping me off the floor for good. Right. I mean, like all these things had to happen in the right way. And, I'm just incredibly lucky. I mean, from the hospital staff to the paramedic, to the firemen, to the whole situation, it's crazy just to think about, literally, they had me in this coma for a week because they had me on this machine called an ECMO machine, which is a machine now. A lot of hospitals use it proactively in the ER, but at the time, only Cedars used it proactively in the ER, and I think one other hospital in New York, maybe Mount Sinai. I'm not sure, but it goes through your groin, goes up to your heart, and keeps your heart beating for you. So that's what they kept me, when all my organs failed, they were like pumping me through all this medicine and the IVs in my neck, and the ECMO machine was keeping my heart beating. So basically on the 5th night, they were telling my family, my mom, my aunt, my brother, and my cousin, they all flew in for the week, obviously. And when I'm still in this coma in the ICU for that whole week, they're telling, hey, we have to take him off the ECMO machine to see if his heart will even beat on his own.
Mm-hmm.
And they're preparing them for the worst. This is essentially like pulling the plug. And they're also saying, by the way, he flatlined 8 times. We don't know, how much oxygen didn't go to the brain those times. Simply put, they didn't say it in this harsh way, but, even if he survives and his heart does beat on its own, he might be a vegetable. My mom is begging them for any kind of hope. Like, isn't there any chance, any percentage of rehabilitation? They're like, look, even if he does have a chance to be rehabilitated, it might take him a couple of years to talk, let alone walk or move around. They took me off the ECMO machine. Shortly after, I wake up going, what's going on? Where am I? And trying to escape my hospital bed. And they had to restrain me. That's why they were like, where is he getting this energy from? And then the next day, all my organs went back to normal. Half a day later, I'm out of the ICU in a regular hospital bed. And then 2 days after that, total of 4 days after the coma, I'm home.
I also find it interesting that you had so much energy after being in a coma for a week. Personally, myself, I had a pretty major surgery when I was 16, and I was in ICU for, I think, 10 days or maybe 2 weeks. And I was on bed rest the entire time. And
it was
out.
It was a weird surgery. He actually wanted to get even shorter than he already is.
Yeah.
So removed 2 inches from his shins. It was a really rare surgery.
That is odd.
Dangerous. But
Yeah.
It worked.
But even so, after that 10 days or so, I pretty much had to learn how to walk again.
No, but I know what you mean by that, because like literally that was I think that energy was from panic and discombobulation, because, after I got my faculties back, I did have to then walk around the hospital floor with a nurse. And it did take me, then I had to do physical therapy at the hospital, coming back for like 2 months after that, 3 times a week, just doing the treadmill and all that. So, like your muscle mass just goes like that after a few days of solid bed rest.
Yeah, I couldn't believe the amount of muscle.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like 5 days of, being incapacitated, lying in this bed with all these machines and IVs hooked up to me. Yeah, it took me a while to get that. But that first reaction was like, I guess just panic and, fight or flight maybe.
Yeah, so it's rare to find someone who has died and come back. And I am curious, because sometimes you get these folks who have these experiences when they die once and they saw the light at the end of the tunnel or something along those lines, something in terms of what happens when you die, which is the biggest question that everyone has had since the history of humankind.
Yeah.
And you died like 68 times in one night.
Yeah. Now that we got the boring stuff out of the way, you dying 8 times, what did you see while you were dead?
Let's get to the good stuff. The first thing that when I woke up, after they took me off the machine and off the ECMO machine, I remember looking over, because it was a calming moment. So I don't know which came first, and I've never gotten the right story, but I looked over, and in like the kind of guest chair in my ICU room, this is like this little girl, like looking like she was like wearing like a school uniform or something. It looked like she was like eating like Skittles or M&Ms or something. And I was like, what the hell's going on? And she just kind of gave me this smile and nod, and it kind of comforted me, going like, okay, I'm in the right place. Later, when I finally was, completely, calm and, awake throughout the day, I remember asking one of the nurses, like, hey, do night nurses, like single parents or, if they can't find babysitters or something like that, are they allowed to bring their kids here? And she's like, Evan, she's like, God forbid there's a kid that needs to be in the ICU. Other than that, no children are allowed in here. And I'm like, what was that? And so that was already freaky. But the freakiest moment to me was I had this like memory when I finally, was lucid and my faculties were back, in the lobby of my building. It's very high ceilings. And I had this image, and I couldn't understand why I had this image from this point of view, but I felt like I was like floating near the high ceiling, weightlessness, like in a pool, void of emotion, not worried, just completely calm and in the moment, and looking down at the firemen wheeling me out on the stretcher to the front door to get to the ambulance outside. And like I was tethered to my body looking down. And I was like, why am I having this odd thing of like, shouldn't my memory point of view be looking up at the ceiling?
Yep.
And the doors in my lobby, like there's like one, well, they fixed it now, but back in 2016, like one door always jammed. So they had to like kind of like tilt the stretcher to get me out of there and the right door. So I was able to describe when I met up with the firemen, because like I would come by all the time after they told me that no one came by to thank them. Like I would come by like once a month and bring them, Starbucks vat of coffee or, donuts or sometimes a bottle of scotch. For that first year, I was just showering them with gifts and gratitude. And I remember when I told them this story, they were telling me like they just like kind of like all like collectively went white, and they were like, that's exactly how we got you from A to B. And I was able to describe exactly like what I saw. And so that was like the first like memory of my lucid conscious thought. When I told the doctors this and the nurses, they told me that a lot of times in the ER, if they're doing like a life or death type of surgery and they're, there's a chance that they might lose the patient, they'll write things on the floor in the surgery room. And if they ever like lose the patient for, a short amount of time, they'll always ask like if the patient could tell them what was written, next to the bedside on the floor. And even a fellow producer, a friend of mine, afterwards hooked me up with this New York Times bestselling author. He's written like 5 books on near-death experiences. His name is Paul Perry. He's written a lot of books. He's interviewed thousands of people. And, he told me, he's like, I can write a whole book on you. He's like, out of all my experience, no one has flatlined 8 times in a row. But all his stories, and I looked them up myself. Like I researched it the hell out of it when I got out of the hospital. I was fascinated with the subject, obviously. And so many people that he interviewed and so many stories online, that you research, they all talk about like, being tethered to their body and looking down, feeling weightlessness and void of emotion, everything that I just explained to you. There's so many similar stories. And even Paul Perry told me about so many doctors that he's talked to over the years and nurses and stuff that work in these, ERs and, operating rooms, talking about that writing on the floor and stuff. So when I told, the doctors and nurses that, let alone firemen, they all were like, yeah, like the doctors and nurses didn't blink. The firemen were freaked out because I was describing to them exactly what they were doing for me motion wise when I was quote unquote dead.
The little girl that you saw, so clearly you didn't recognize her at all, but one story that I was reading was a person who had obviously not the same experience as you, but like the dying and coming back to life. They saw their grandmother, who they had never met, who had died in 1930. And I don't know what state she was in, whether she was like from a picture or something that she had seen. Do you think have you talked to your family to see if like describing this girl to any of them could have been a former family member or anything?
I did. And none of them could figure out, who this little girl was. Though I will say there was an interesting thing that happened to me 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital. And also when I got out of the hospital, all my senses were dialed up to like 11. Like I was able, like I live in a very big apartment complex. And, many hallways down from me, there's like an outdoor communal, patio with a grill and stuff like that. And, my mom and my brother and my sister-in-law were here for those first few weeks kind of taking care of me while I was building up that muscle mass and getting back to, full strength. And I remember saying, why are you guys cooking steak? I shouldn't probably be eating red meat right now, after a heart attack, let alone a massive widowmaker heart attack. And they were like, we're not cooking anything. And then my brother went down, you got to go down a few hallways to get to that area, which is near the laundry room. And he saw that they were cooking steaks. I was able also to hear my mom and my brother talking about me in my other, in the other bedroom. And, I live in like a 900 square feet apartment with, it's a 2-bedroom. And I was able to tell them, hey, I heard you guys saying this. They're like, our doors are closed. Your doors are closed. How did you hear that? So everything was like kind of dialed up, my senses. So 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital, I'm sleeping, in the middle of the night. My dog, she passed 2 years ago, but yeah, no, it happens. But she was a black lab, and she just always slept on the edge of my bed. And I remember waking up and seeing like this shadow of, like a figure, like a human being, kind of like walking around my bed, like from end to end. And Atticus, my dog, was following the shadow on the corner of the bed, like all from edge to edge to edge. And I remember not being freaked out. I just remember thinking that, oh, this is either my dad or my great uncle, who was like my best friend growing up. I just felt like it was a family member. I'd like to think it was my dad. I mean, obviously I can't tell or anything like that, but, like weird stuff was happening like that for the first few weeks after I got out of the hospital and, getting back to kind of just normal. I normally would have just thought, okay, I'm just dreaming or something like that. But the fact that Atticus was following the shadow from end to end, I just, that's not happened to me since. And it definitely freaked me out, but, also made me feel kind of comforted.
Yeah, that's super interesting. For those, obviously the name Widowmaker heart attack speaks for itself, but for those audio listeners who don't know what that is, what's the difference between that heart attack and a regular heart attack?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Widowmaker heart attack. Widowmaker is your main, that's what they call the main artery in your heart. And so when it gets to be 100% blockage, that's what will cause a full blown heart attack. It's basically considered a Widowmaker heart attack because it's the most intense heart attack you can have.
Do you attribute any of this to like, I don't know if you're a religious guy, do you attribute any to like any kind of miracle or anything? Or is it just some sort of like, what the hell just happened to me at all?
I mean, I'm spiritual for sure. I'm Jewish, but, Reformed, so, I mean, I believe in God. I believe in, obviously, an afterlife now. But I've always been curious about this, especially as a horror writer and, very spiritual. I definitely think that there was some miraculous thing going on. Even my doctor, he's my cardiologist. I didn't have a cardiologist before this incident, obviously. I guess that's not obvious, but I didn't have one. And
I suppose there would have been some warnings.
Yeah, exactly.
When it hit you, it was such a surprise.
But he's the attending at Cedars. So he was, meaning he's running the department, and now he's my cardiologist. And he told me at my 6-month checkup, like I had to do a stress test. And he's looked at the results, and he's like, the stress test is crazy. He's like, it's the results of like a teenager who's never had an ailment a day in his life. He's like, look, he's like, everything that's happened to you. He's like, I'm a scientist. I can't use miracle in my vocabulary. He's like, but there's no other way to describe this. And he's like, he tells all his patients and colleagues, they had like seminars on me to promote the ECMO machine, to make it, to use it more proactively in the ER. Like I was like patient X and stuff, at the hospital.
Obviously, all of us are extreme experts in ECMO machines, but for those uninformed listeners who are listening, explain what that is. Is it somewhat similar to a defibrillator? Like I know that does kind of the same thing. If a heart is murmuring, the defibrillator will get it back to beating.
Again, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say yay or nay to that, but I do know that the defibrillator is to get your heart pumping again, where this is to keep your heart actively pumping if it needs help. That's why they had me in the coma for the whole week, because other than the organs dropping the levels and the IVs, they were keeping me on this machine. So when they said that they were pulling the plug on that 5th night of the coma, they were taking me off the ECMO machine, saying, hey, his heart might not beat on its own. We're taking off the assistance here.
Yeah. So basically it's assisting you.
Heart beating during, dire circumstances.
And that was a gamble taking you off the ECMO machine, right?
I mean, like, it was time. They had to see, like they just can't keep me on there for, weeks or months. It's not like
it can only ECMO for so long,
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know about that. I just know that they were like, I don't know what the rhyme and reason was for, hey, they're taking me off the 5th night as opposed to the 4th night or the 6th night. All that I know is that they were saying, hey, we got to see if his heart can beat on something.
Right. So this was an induced coma where they're like, we got to put him in a coma to make sure that.
Yeah, I was in an induced coma. They put me into an induced coma right after the surgery. Right after they put the 2 stents in, they're like, we got to put him on this ECMO machine. All his organs are dropping. Yes, we put the stents in, and there you go. Again, when I was with the firemen, that's when they were like, hey, you got to go over to the Los Feliz station to meet Ed, the paramedic who revived you 6 out of 8 times in the ambulance. And I was able to describe him to a T. And the reason I was able to describe him to a T, like the look on his face, the scar on his face, everything, And they were like, oh, wow. Like they thought I met him already. I'm like, no, I'm like, I didn't even know his name until you told me.
That's crazy.
And the reason that is because a few weeks, because I went to go visit them, like, probably about like a month and a half when I was finally able to, have the strength to walk around and stuff. And a few weeks after the hospital, again, in the middle of the night, I woke up like how a nightmare or a dream wakes you up. Woke up in the middle of the night, like probably like 3 or 4 in the morning. And I had this image in my head of me in the ambulance on like the side bench, again, floating over the bench, not like sitting on it, but like kind of floating over it. Again, calm or void of emotion, watching this paramedic who I did not meet alive technically, or couldn't remember him, in between those moments of, going back and forth in the flatlines, and watching him do compressions on my chest. And the mental thought that went into my mind with this visual memory that woke me up was, it looks like he's putting so much pressure on my chest. I want him to stop that. It looks like it's hurting really badly. So I was doing physical therapy at the hospital 3 days a week for the first 2 months after the incident. And I remember being on the treadmill and telling that day when I woke up in the middle of the night, I was going later, a few hours later, to my PE session and a PT session. And so I was telling one of my nurses who's, putting the monitor on me and, watching me on the treadmill, I told her what I just told you. And she went over and looked at the records in the computer, because the firemen and the paramedics, waited until I was in the ER, because this is such a odd circumstance of what happened. And the paramedic told them the whole story of like what kind of went down. And in his notes in the computer was one time when when we got him to come back to life, he pushed me off him and said, "Hey, you're hurting me. It's like you're putting too much pressure on my chest." What's also crazy, I guess, is that little foreshadowing is that I wanted to be a writer since I was 5 years old. And went to creative arts summer camps growing up to make short films and stuff. And the first short film I made when I was 15 years old at this creative arts summer camp in upstate New York. It's called Long Lake, New York. It was Long Lake Camp. And the first short I made was a short called Life After Life, about a kid who dies and then comes back to life in another body. And then when I came home and I had skills of how to make, short films, my next one was called Flatline, about another person who goes almost to the afterlife completely and then gets pulled back, and he was just about to pass these 2 trees in the forest. And if he went there, he would have been dead for good. But growing up, my mom was always saying, she's like, "I'm so excited that you're doing all these short films." She's like, "But why are all your subjects this morbid topic?" And I was, I couldn't answer her then, but I think, now looking back, I was always so scared of not existing. Like, what happens when you can't think or feel, or, I can't even fathom what that's like. And so I think I was making all those films because I was fascinated with the subject, but also scared of what happens next, and hopeful that all these movies that I saw growing up, from Heaven Can Wait to Ghost to, all these, paranormal films, that was true, that there was something after. And I definitely now feel a little bit more comforted on my 9th life that there is something more.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, if you picked horror as the genre that you want to write for, then it's going to be naturally morbid anyways. But you cannot ignore the striking similarities between your own story and those first 2 films. It's just wild. It's
it's crazy. I mean, the fact that was just the things that I picked to make these short films with. I mean, literally in the movie Flatline, the reason the guy gets pulled back from the ghostly forest trees, you come back and you see someone, working on his chest. It's terrible. It looks horrible. It's a terrible short film, but it's still really a cool connection to what happened to, foreshadowing later in life.
So as we start to wind the interview down, I think my final question for you, and Dave and Jesse, obviously ask whatever you want to close with, but since you've had this incident, do you feel closer to the paranormal, in terms of like when I go into certain places, I feel like a presence in certain rooms or places that we go to investigate. Do you feel like you have a stronger connection in that sense? Does that make sense? Did I word that properly?
I understand what you're saying, Rob.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess to answer your question, simply put, yes. I definitely, think about it a lot more and definitely feel a connection to it. So, like I said, seeing that shadow and my
Right.
dog following that shadow around my bed. I mean, I also just remember like weird things happening throughout those next few months. I have a piano in the other room, and I would hear like a couple keys, hitting every now and then in the middle of the night, and I'd be like, "What the hell is that about?"
Now, do you think that's something that has to do with the event, or do you think that just might be your house could be haunted?
I don't think the apartment's haunted. I think it's more maybe my connection with it. Then I mean, these are just guesstimations, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
but
we're just spitting in the dark here, but
Yeah.
we're coming up with the shit. But like, I feel like if you die so many times, right, and you come back, maybe there's some sort of a weird balance of afterlife, and that maybe you could be making weird connections. Did you experience anything before this? Because obviously we talked about the little girl, we talked about the shadow, we talked about these piano keys. Now, did you have any experiences with the paranormal before you died so many times?
No, other than just wanting to write about it and always being a thought in my mind.
Yeah. So I feel like maybe just because of what you went through, maybe there's this weird kind of in between land that you could be in where now you're more open to seeing and experiencing these things. It's a very, very strange thing that we don't get a lot, because there's not everyone can say I died several times. Not everyone can say they died once and came back. It's a miracle if they came back once. In the fact that you came back so many times,
Other than the interest in the subject matter, nothing weird has ever happened to me before that. But again, the shadow around the bed that my dog was following, the piano keys. Oh, there was this other time too that I could have sworn I turned my foyer light off, and then waking up in the middle of the night and the light's on. That could be complete I just forgot to turn it off. But I don't think that I would have turned it off because the light would have been shining. It's an apartment. It's, I would have noticed that light on even, sleeping, because my bedroom door's not normally closed. So that being on was just another weird thing, but that's just speculation.
I have a great theory.
I will say, David, I know you have a theory. I just want to say, because I'm in a house where weird things happen all the time, I've started making note and just taking down the dates and stuff like that. When was the most recent one that happened? It was not that long ago, or has it been a while?
No, it wasn't that long ago. It was just a couple of weeks ago, actually. That's funny. Was that it's been, usually it's warm in Los Angeles, but it's been unseasonably cold here lately. So don't need to turn on the air conditioning at all. Not yet anyway. It's not been as hot as it normally is this past year. And I came home from a friend's house one night. I think this was 2 Saturdays ago, and went to bed. And in the morning, I woke up and the air conditioning is on, and I'm like, "What the hell?" And I go to the thermostat, and it's on. And I was like, "There's no way." I was like, unlike the light thing I told you about, that happened to me, shortly after my whole incident. There is absolutely no way that I turned that on. So that was unusual.
So did you use your death to get out of any legal binding contracts?
No.
He had 8 divorces in one night. It was unbelievable.
No. Well, actually, it's funny. I don't know. It's funny, but
I was about to say this doesn't sound like it's about to be funny, but I'm in.
Well, okay. It's interesting, I guess is a better way of saying it. That I am divorced. My ex-wife and I were still good friends. And at the time she was a nurse at Cedars-Sinai, so she got all the best doctors to come see me in the ICU when I was in the coma. My mom called her and said, "Hey, Evan's at Cedars. I'm flying out there right now. Can you stay with him?" When my family got there, I was already in the coma after surgery in the ICU by the time they got to the hospital at midnight that night. And Kristen, my ex, was, just sitting there holding my hand, waiting for them to come because she didn't want me to be alone, even though I wasn't conscious. And she was very helpful. So I mean, even though the divorce happened years before, she was there to help me out.
That's awesome.
Major time of need.
Very cool.
That is awesome. Yeah. Had it been a nasty divorce, I wonder if it would have been a situation where you only kept dying because the ex kept pulling the plug and then plugging it back, and when the doctors walk back, and like, oh shit, oh he's dead again. Yeah. But no, you're fine.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Do you have anything you want to promote other than being alive still and being a superhero and smelling steak and all that?
Nothing to promote right now, but I'll let you know when my next film goes into production. My next one's supposed to go into production late this summer.
Very cool.
And then I just wrote a supernatural horror movie with my writing partner, and my producing partner and I are going to make our co-directorial debut.
Awesome.
So we're putting together our producers right now. We're going to make it independently because we want to really just see our vision through on this one, and then hopefully sell it to a distributor like A24 or Neon or IFC, someplace that would be right for this. It's got a very HP Lovecraftian type of feel to it.
Right.
So I'll hit you guys up and let you know when that comes to fruition.
Well, if you're looking for actors, we are not it. We are really bad at acting.
I was about to say, I'm like, you got the wrong guys.
That's interesting. I
If
like
you're
that.
looking for a dead guy, I can lay still.
Yeah, well, we could do that for you if you want that. But
Seriously, thank you guys so much for having me on your show. Once Matt pointed me your way, I watched your content. It's really a great show. It's interesting content, and I'm a fan. I'm a subscriber now. I'm a subscriber.
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Awesome.
Appreciate
Thank you
it
very much.
Dude, what an unbelievable story. Like that really is nuts. Like if we had talked about it before, like people who die and come back, we're like, oh man, I'd love to have one of those guys on the show. And then Matt brought it up. He's like, yeah, this guy just won't stop dying to come back. Like, all right. Dude, thanks for sharing the story. It's super interesting, the paranormal side of it. What is that little girl sighting? That one I find the most compelling out of all of them. Obviously, every tale that you have is interesting. My only recommendation, like I said, would be start writing this shit down.
No, it's a good idea. It's a very good idea.
Even if it's something little, most people go through their lives without experiencing anything paranormal. They're not noticing that it could be paranormal. So
Lives was appropriate for him.
But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate being on your show.
Yeah, absolutely, man. What a crazy story. What a crazy story. We'll have to follow up. If you die again, just hit us up and let us know if you can.
You'll be my first call right after 9/11.
It's close, right? It's close. That's gonna do it for us, guys. We'll catch you next time. Peace.